So at the top of my list here, a question for Joseph. So these questions aren't on the screen for you. You just kind of have to rely on me. It says here for Joseph. Yes, down the end.
Hi.
You spoke about IFC during your presentation. Do you envisage this will become useful for infrastructure and civils projects? And we'll go to the rest of the panel after you.
Yeah. So what we propose is we want to have a data container and payload, but it should be independent of IFC. So we are very liberal in terms of treating data. 3D Repo itself was set up in such a way that we can consume IFC, but many other different file formats as well. And the idea is that the payload can be anything. So it can be proprietary data, it can be anything as wide as DGN, Civil 3D, and so on. So yeah, the idea is definitely yes.
Okay. Anyone else from the panel like to add to that comment on IFC for civils? No. So from my perspective as a building engineer, I do see that IFC's got a life in buildings, but I also see my infrastructure colleagues grappling with it. So I'm pleased to hear the open source nature of the likes of 3D Repo is grappling with this and is actually agnostic to it, which is good. Okay. Next question on the list: does Does AFEX have an open API?
It doesn't, but you kind of interact with it through CSV files. So if you're working with a master plan, super simple, just export a CSV file. But I'd be interested to know what they would like it to integrate with, because at £35 a month, it doesn't really matter.
Does anyone here want to, whoever asked that question, do you want to stick your hand up and take that further?
It wasn't me, but are you open for integrations? Are you currently speaking to other software vendors?
As I kind of mentioned earlier, that we work with Oracle, so we're working with them about how we can integrate with P6, but it's a little bit away. Mm-hmm. But with other tools, there's obviously very cool tools that people are speaking about today that we'd be more than happy to start the conversation with.
Great. Okay, that's great. What about the other panelists on open APIs? Do you see these as necessary for all future startups into the sphere of our business to have open APIs? Do you want to start, Carlos, with that one?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yes,
so, we've always talked about open APIs. We're working with AFEX because with our first tools about planning, and the other tools that we're currently fundraising to build out are around procurement, and around site diaries, around other aspects where, kind of to hark on about spreadsheets again, but they're being overused. We always see it as you can't be too insular, and with the tools that we're building, it's about kind of being more connected to the external, external aspects which are affecting your program or project.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I would say it's about that connected data. I mean, certainly what we're seeing on some of the major projects that I'm working on is that there are too many teams that are working in silos, and they are developing their data. It might have a common data structure, but then it just becomes so hard to connect that data together. And actually the real power from this data is when you connect it together to get a much greater understanding of how the project's performing. So when we're able to do that, it's hugely powerful to the project, but it's not common at the moment.
Yeah. And what do we need to do to make it more common? Move on to you to talk about LOD and how we can actually integrate more common standards into our workflows, because as your slide showed, that on the LOD front there are a number of different standards around the world, and they don't talk to each other necessarily, but in terms of pushing LOD to the next step, is that an open API? What's the next step on that?
Yeah, I think that the first part of our work is about concept and principle, but then there will be other parts on the technical implementation. So we want also to provide a sort of base for a technical solution, because you needed to define standard, not only for the framework, but then also for the semantics and so on, because still we call the same thing in a different way, and it's quite complicated. But yes, I think that my point was more to be critical and to first to try to use the information that you need and to provide the information that you need for a specific purpose. And I think that the use of open API, so it can be used.
Yes. So in essence, the linking of different LOD systems should be seamless, because it's just defining very similar things. Just the different countries have opted to define them in a slightly different way. So access to that data is critical.
Yeah, I think everybody would like to create something new. From the LOD, it could be because actually it's not working, so someone would like always to add something different. So, for example, in Italy, they created a classification using letters from A to G.
Mm-hmm.
And because it was to express that it's not only for new construction, because actually, for example, the level of development for US is only for new construction and only for design and construction, let's say. So for new buildings and for design construction. Instead, for us, it's important all the heritage buildings and also to speak about facility management.
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to go to the next question on the list, which is for Converged now. So the question was, what other applications or platforms do you integrate with?
So it's a very good question. It kind of touches on the last one. So just to speak on I absolutely fully agree with everything that was just voiced in terms of the necessity to integrate all of these various systems, people crunching different number. I mean, to just go over some of the challenges as a young business though, because this is a frequent request from our end. And when you're building in this functionality into a very nascent system, and then you're getting requests to do various integrations at various different stages, that definitely presents challenges in terms of how you then how that interplays with your development cycle. So if the majority of your users are then consuming that data through a different system, then it certainly presents challenges to you to develop and add new functionality around that. Because half of your user base are consuming it in a different place. So for us as a business, certainly we have eyes open with respect to the need to integrate with various systems. But at the moment, the level of integration is just one or two fairly small pieces of software that we integrate with. But we certainly have a view to do that in a more meaningful way in the long term.
Which leads on to one of the other questions. Joseph, do you want to add to that, and any other panelists as well? And we'll come back to that question.
Just in terms of APIs, we are 100% behind the idea that people should be sharing data, not files. But on the other hand, the API itself as a concept, it's becoming a buzzword in the industry, and I think people should be careful about how they use it. So there are companies I shall not name that will provide the API to read their proprietary file formats, but you have to upload your data to the US. So I just want to warn people they should be careful about how they use these systems and think about how you manage your projects.
Yes. Where's your data resident in 3D Repo?
So 3D Repo we are hosting on Amazon in London and also in Canada. And basically we did it because exactly of these reasons of data residency. So we opened a data center for one of our large client competitors of yours. And we are open to open new data centers for other clients as well. Okay.
Any other panelists want to add to that? Another question for the Converged then. Can this data be linked back to our BIM models through an API, was the question. So it actually comes back to that same point.
Sensing a common theme in the questioning. Well, again, at the moment, and we're just starting our very early exploration into this field. So we are in the process of integrating with a specific BIM system, with a view to opening that out more broadly moving forwards. But in terms of reaching maturity, in terms of the data we are collecting, gathering, processing, how we make that available, there's still a lot of open questions as to what data is presented through that API, how that's going to be viewed, how that integration evolves moving forwards. And so it's something we just want to really carefully think through before just jumping. So but very much it will be, you'll be able to view the current progress of the project and strength of the various elements via our data through a BIM package.
Yes, it sounds like most uses of data is for a downstream use, what can be used for others further down the line of construction. I think with the Converged tool, it might be that it can go back upstream to the designers to help do some sense checks and certainly on striking formwork and so on. So it's both directions of data travel, I think. Another question here, this is for AFEX. Are you able to roll up multiple projects across an estate and for master planning?
So we take our data from project to project, and then that rolls up. So if you've got common themes, as in common subcontractors, you can see how they're performing across projects, and also if you've got projects, say some in the north, some in the south, you can see how they're doing comparatively, regional as well. So it does interface with the master. Was the question about the master schedule?
The question was, are you able to roll up multiple projects across an estate or for master planning?
Oh, okay, So in short, yes.
Yes, good. So another one for Carlos AFEX. how quickly experienced professionals in construction how quickly can they pick up your application?
Yeah, so I guess the easy answer is very quickly, and then the kind of slightly more complex answer is we spent a lot of time getting user profiles again, so looking at who our clients would be, the type of person that's using it, and the type of condition they're working in. So if you're expecting an engineer after working in Thames Tideway, chucking it down with rain, they hate their job, they hate their life, they hate what's on TV, and then they're being asked to do a 4-week look ahead, you know, at 6 o'clock when they want to get the tube home, they're not going to put in the best set of data. But what you've got to do, you have to make the tools be like the tools that they expect to use every day in life. So make them so we steal things from Rightmove, we steal things from Tinder, we steal things from the Sky remote, because these are things that people are most familiar with inputting in, and it means that they're more familiar to and more encouraged to put their data in that way. If you try to make it really complicated, blocky and MS-DOSy, they're going to treat it as if it's foreign. But if you make it as an application that they would use because they want to use it, then they'll feel more comfortable in using it, and that's something we've really made a conscious effort to do so.
And the linking of that data through to the other sources of information, such as 3D Repo, so it just makes it all gel and so much more powerful.
Sure.
That's the idea. Okay. Any questions from the floor before I do my scrolling and see where we are on the on this? Any questions from the floor? Well, there's one. Should we get the microphone over here?
Hi. A question for Marcia. You mentioned LOD needs to be treated more generically. Can you elaborate on that? What you mean by how to approach that?
So I said that we need to be specific, not generic.
Well, you said you should. One of your last slides, it was more about treat it more as a global thing, rather than. But maybe that's why you could elaborate a bit on that.
Yeah, sure. So the idea is that you need to understand which information you need in order to fulfill a purpose. And then this information can be, let's say, related to the geometry, but sometimes maybe for the purpose the geometry is not so important. So you think about different uses, can be rendering. Maybe the quality of the geometry and the representation maybe should be very high. But then the properties that are associated to the different objects and so on are not so relevant for that purpose. In that, if you think about another purpose, I don't know, maybe, again, quantity takeoff, you don't care a lot about the representation. But you care more about, maybe, so not the appearance, you don't care about the appearance, but you care more about maybe the dimension or other kind of properties. Then you need to think about, okay, the geometry is sometimes quite complex also to how to check and to validate. So which are the key aspects in order to define the geometry, if it's relevant for that. And then related to the attributes and so on, are these related to element, parts, systems, the entire model, entire sites, whatever. So it's something like to be more flexible. Instead, maybe generic is to be more flexible, not to be, because one standard say, okay, this should be related to elements, so we go for it because the standards say that, and we don't think about how we want to deliver the information in the best way in order to complete that at that specific point of time. I don't know if it's answered. So if I answer your point.
Does it mean that we need to look at the start of a job differently, rather than just saying we're going one up, one up, one up, to see what the requirements are, and then build on that?
Yeah, it started, I always say, started with the end in mind, and we would like every time for the beginning to define everything, but the reality is not like that. So the client doesn't know what they want, and also, we don't know how to specify. But then when we define what we would like to achieve and how we would like to use our model for, then try to, include in the, provide the information that we need in order. Then can be related to the geometry, can be, properties that we use. It can be also the documentation, that is another big topic that we are using, because still we need the files in order, to have the build permits and so on. So we need still need some, piece of paper and some documents in order to finalize the some tasks and so on.
And another question for you, Marzia, was are you still looking for contributors? Are you still looking for contributions or contributors?
Contribution. So it's quite the way that the standardization works is quite strange because in order to contribute to the text, you need to be part of your standardization body. So, for example, here in UK, people that are part for the British Standardization Institute they need to contact the institute, and actually they need to pay a fee, and then can access the file and can provide comments. But what I tried to do is, because I wanted to produce something that is useful for the industry, is like, to have this informal chat with people in order to discuss these topics and to have feedback. So from the formal point of view, if you would like to have access to the text and to provide, your feedback as a company, as a you need to go through the a formal path. But of course, feel free to contact me, and I'm always happy to discuss about this. Yeah.
And do you have a hotline into the digital plan of work and the NBS toolkit and so on for what their next steps are?
Who is working the NBS BIM toolkit?
That's telling.
So maybe the question we need to is not about the future, but.
Again?
Yep. There we go. So, from practical point of view, I can't stress enough the ideas of LOD and why it is important, because one of our partner companies, they told us they had clients who had beautiful BIM models and they had cash registers, and you could zoom in and you could see the individual chips where there was 3D geometry saying Intel on them. So obviously what someone has done is they downloaded the manufacturer's models and put them in. Yeah. So that's where the need for level of detail comes in, because otherwise you end up with extremely heavy models geometrically without any proper data behind it. So the cache register could be just a cube with the right information behind it. That's what I think is important.
Yeah.
If I can add something. So last week I was in a conference in Slovenia, and actually I was trying to explain that we need to stop using this object from the library that are generic, and you use a placeholder, and people, they don't know if actually it's a placeholder or it's actually you decided to use that. And then of course in the industry there is a lot of resistance, because for a designer it's easy to download and put in your model. But if you would like to improve, I think, the workflow, we need really to define the geometry for the purpose, the properties for that purpose. So there is still a lot of work that should be done.
Yes. And I think, Michael, you were looking to say, to include...
Yeah, just very quickly. I mean, from a design point of view, for me, LOD is absolutely crucial. It's our scope. It's what we need to do. So if that isn't completely defined, then we're just opening the whole project up, I guess, for disagreements later down the line when somebody was expecting one thing, the other person was expecting another thing. We actually spend quite a lot of time now creating kind of exemplar or catalogues at the start of the project to completely define what is required. It also therefore challenges other stakeholders and other parties to take that information and make sure that that's useful for what they need it for. So I guess it makes sure everyone's on the same level, but that does cost money. So like what you're saying, if those standards can be right, all clear, all in a line, and we can just pick one off there, then that makes everyone's life easier and more efficient.
Yes. Okay. And whilst you're on, I have another question for you on the system. Is the model used to identify risk through analysis, or to anchor to the location of the risk? Is it connected to elements, I guess, or is it location-based?
So at the moment, it's location-based, so it's looking at a particular point. But we have had discussions about how we can use the classification system, so that if you don't have a particular point early on in the project, actually you can just identify maybe a system or a facility. But it's been a really interesting learning curve that we've gone through, because some of the projects we've used are underground stations, and if you look at a hazard, say, for the base slab, actually that can be 200 meters long. So if you put one point or one hazard at one point, actually that's not representative of that whole area. So actually, how do you visualize that element? So I think what we've done at the moment is we have looked at the initial solution, that is how the industry is working now with those Excel spreadsheets that everyone loves. We're resolving that problem, but I guess by doing that, we've opened up a lot more questions. Things we're thinking about, can we go to the gaming industry and see maybe aspects of how they would define a hazard? Because we can define a point. Should we define in areas? Yeah. So at the moment, it's just a point.
Okay. And are you introducing in something like machine learning to try and identify those hazards and risks, or is it all based on the user and the engineer's knowledge?
Simply at the moment, we've just done a very simple exercise of taking what we do, everyone's reinventing the wheel and trying to remove that problem. We hope that in 6 months' time, we've got the system out and running, lots of projects are using it, lots of projects are collecting data with the same data structure, and then that gives us the opportunity to go through the process again and then actually say, do you know what, we can be really clever with this. Then we can start to do clever things. But at the moment, we're just putting in the foundation for everybody to work in a common way and stop reinventing the wheel.
So then you're capturing that data to make use of it downstream?
Yes, but I'm not collecting it. The projects are collecting it.
Right, okay. Fine. Okay. Any other questions from the floor at the moment? So a couple down here. Let's start with the nearest to me.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a question for Marcia about the LOD. Having worked basically on different in international settings, so different nations like Europe and also worldwide, how much you think the LOD implementation has been affected by having different construction contracts in this, like in different countries? So basically, the confusion could be created of having different stages, also like of construction and design. So like the Riba stages are, for instance, different from the Italian ones. And so basically could be this, causing a little bit of more confusion about the LOD, or do you think they are not related?
So I think that they are not related because if you speak with everybody in the industry, when you really ask, is it working? Do you really use it and is it clear? It's not. So actually it's really a waste and it's not working everywhere. But we like to use this number and we think that specifying this number is everything is clear. And coming back to the stages is because in different stages you can have different uses. So you can really, if it's design, concept design, and so there are different players and they need the different information and different kind of geometry. Maybe sometimes they don't need the geometry also because they use some tools and they need only, some properties to do. There is not a smart way of, dealing. This is not this flexibility. We like to have this simplistic approach. We don't like to deal with the complexity. And this for me was very clear when I started this work. And I was very, very curious then when I was speaking and they say, why do you use this number? Is it clear? I say, no, Marta, you're too picky. If the client is happy, it's okay. If not, we will add something to the model. Don't worry, and so on. But for me, it was not enough. I think that us as an industry, us as professional, we can do better. So.
Okay. And a question further down that row.
Am I allowed one or two?
Two's fine.
Okay. The one about the collecting of the data, which I thought was really interesting. There is another company who should not be mentioned who is taking that approach with one of their products of collecting the data, but the trouble is they're anonymize it and then selling it back to the people who've made it. So what's your approach going to be about? How are you going to collect the data for the benefit of all and share it for all and establish that sort of equality of value? Am I making sense? Is that not to sell it back, but when you collect that data about what is good practice from a safety point of view, and so everyone contributes saying these are the right things to do, how are you then giving it that back to the people who've generated it for you?
This is for me, yeah. Sorry, I didn't realise it's halfway through, sorry. So I need to be clear that we are providing this solution. So you can go onto 3D Repo, you can access and place your risks on there. You can take that SharePoint site and you can take it back to your own company infrastructure and put it in there. We are not doing anything associated with taking your data, looking at your data. We're not doing anything associated with that. So I guess what we're saying is that if we get that data structure in place now, we immediately are providing value to the industry by removing 4 or 5k each time someone develops this approach. In the future, maybe then we can have those discussions about how we can connect these together. And I guess we've got lots of crazy and wacky ideas about how we could do this, and maybe the health and safety executive could own it and push out ideas. Mm-hmm. Maybe we could assist the way that they use their funding, because we can identify this risk is realising itself all the time. But at the moment, we're simply just providing a solution for people to do the job that they're already doing and reinventing the wheel each time easier.
So from 3D Repo point of view, you own the data. It's your project. We don't have access to it. It's encrypted. So you have access to your data and you manage it. Having said that, because it's an I3P funded project, it's an open collaboration of a fairly large number of industrial players in the UK, hopefully they'll be able to share the data between themselves. Now, we had a very interesting proposal with another company, one of the consortium members, and they were saying that statistically they know for a fact that they are likely to kill one person on their next project. So I think it's beyond the commercial. I think it's, if we can save lives, that's the more important. And hopefully all of these big players will be able to share the information for the benefit of the industry.
That's fantastic. And then the other question I had was both you, Marcia, and yourself in the middle, is about the LOD, LOIN approach. I think one of the challenges we do face is understanding that people's needs are different and actually signing up to satisfy those needs, which is to say that if you need a pretty representation of a real world object and someone else needs a cube, how do you sign up to satisfy that and agree to do so if you're the first person in the chain? So if you're the first person at the beginning that says, I've authored it this way, but I recognize that 3 people down the road might only need to be able to count things and the number of, and they don't care what it looks like, how are we going to satisfy those? Have you had any thoughts about those two?
Yeah, I think that that should be managed with metadata that we need to attach in order to explain better. So to have a sort of history about why that has been created. And of course, if we can take and start from that in order to, to use them for another uses, but then also, it's about responsibility. We are, tonight very lucky that we have May also with us. I don't know, May, if you can, don't sigh. So she did a great job together also with Sarah Rock about, I think that you are familiar with the report about the legal implication of BIM. So it's really important about also responsibility. So I provided information for that use at that stage, so I'm responsible for that. That is particular to fulfill that purpose. Then if you would like to use for another use, then it's on your risks. But then your question is how to, to express this. So I think that
it is that transformation of data from one state to another where someone might not need that complexity or they need more.
Exactly. So we need then to understand if we can start for that, and then we need to add other information, and then maybe for some users you can use the same information that has been produced for someone in order to specify more detail, or you can use the same. So it's really quite a complex way. So, but we need. I think that the future is to deal with this complexity and tools that are already available or that need to be developed in order to make our life easier.
Any further questions from the floor, or should we go back to the shape do, and then I think we'll call it an end after that. Any other questions from the floor? Okay, so a couple of final questions. So I'm trying to filter it. There's a question about startups, and we've seen a few examples of startups, and the question is about how we encourage startups in this very complex area of construction that we have. So I'd like to seek some thoughts from startups and how you've achieved it so far.
So I mean, I'm not one of the founders of Converged, for the record, but we're a 3-year-old business, and we've had masses of support both from industry partners and from effectively funders. And so certainly we've seen within certain contractors, certain engineering firms, there's certainly a great push to introduce startups and new techniques, I mean, my limited time within the construction industry, I've certainly seen, generally speaking, quite a lot of conservatism and reluctance to change. But actually, there's quite a refreshing within certain aspects of the industry. There's certainly quite a refreshing change of pace now to try and look at new technologies, to try and bring in new players into that. And we've certainly felt the benefits of that, and I hope that's a trend that continues.
Okay. Anyone else from the panel? Carlos, do you want to add to that?
Sure, yeah. I think what contractors can do and large organisations can do is help us out with procurement. In construction, obviously, the way they procure software is often the same way as they procure steel. It's the same processes, the same people, more often than not. And if you're paying a startup or you're paying Tata Steel, the requirements for us to get that license fee compared to them is slightly different. So to kind of make that more lenient for the smaller companies that they're working with is really beneficial for us. But I completely echo what you said in terms of there is an expectation around the kind of archaic way of doing things and a lack of kind of adoption of innovation within these organisations, especially the larger contractors. However, it does come from individuals and people at project level that are really pushing and championing how to make my project better or how to make my sector better, because there is a competition within that. Obviously, it's a hierarchical industry where there is a strive to be at the top, and people do take ownership of that, and there is now a less of a reluctance to introduce a new way of doing things. So there is definitely a shift, but it does come at a project level, and we love it to come at a corporate level. But yeah, definitely.
Okay. I think Joseph wants to add.
Yeah,
to
I
that.
think you guys have to provide. Just give us money. That's the whole point. But joking aside, it's important to get access to funding and also access to projects. So we are not asking for free money, but from my personal experience, I paid for my doctoral research. We did work with carry of contractors who helped kickstart the whole process as well. So just having access to real clients and real projects is definitely what helps, because that pays the bills at the end of the day.
Yeah, good. And we saw with the likes of Flux as a data interoperability tool or service that they folded. So from my perspective, there's a great need to have open source and access into some of these tools via APIs, but also understanding a bit about the roadmaps, because we get hooked into a project, onto an ecosystem, and then if they change tack or fold, we're all left high and dry. So I'm going to come on to the last question here to the panel, which is all about what's the biggest factor holding back innovation in the AEC industry? So let's start from Joseph and work down, and then I think we'll call it quits. Sorry?
Money is one, but as the other guy said, it's the reluctance to change and to adjust, and some people might fear that we are going to make them redundant. That's not the case. We are trying to make them more efficient so they can do more tasks at the same time, and we are trying to help them. And we came across a director on the project who's told us that he's got 3 years to go and he's going to retire, so he hopes that this BIM thing is not going to touch him. So hopefully we can push the younger generation forward.
Okay. Carlos.
Yeah, it's a bit of a cultural thing, but I think that's definitely changing, and I think that's a really good point, is that often the decision makers are of the latter stages of their career, but then you are seeing that dilute down, and that's where we're really trying to kind of get in with people, is to try and just explain to them, and this is what I mentioned in my presentation, is that there's definitely 3 levels of how we do things. So it's trying to make people's lives easier, but then see the benefit for the other people there. If it's just about what's going to be the benefit to a corporate, they're not really going to care that it's going to save their people time. And if it's going to make an engineer's life easier, they're not really going to care about the fact that there's data for the corporate. So it's about serving everyone within that chain, or that value chain. And if you can do that, then hopefully it's a much easier sell.
Okay. Michael.
So my thoughts on this are that working with startups for me has always been quite a challenging process, in that we have to demonstrate the value that that's going to deliver to the project. And I'm not just talking, on Mott MacDonald here, I'm talking project levels and with different organisations. We have to demonstrate the value. We ask the startup to come in, they do a trial for us, then we decide at the end of the trial, well, actually it's not really quite achieved what we want, although we might have learnt lots, and then we don't actually go on to that procurement stage, because it takes, like you say, 2 months to get through procurement. So, just thinking while been talking now, we talk about manufacturing, Formula One, that these, move really fast, change of pace, research and development money. Is there an opportunity there to be putting some money aside for research and development and pushing that a little bit harder, rather than specific value-driven outcomes? Potentially.
Okay. Marcia.
Yeah, in my opinion, there is a combination of different factors. One thing is really about managing the complexity of our industry, and also about there is this people attitude, but I see also people that are very young and they maybe are innovative. They join some companies that don't support innovation, then they start to continue in the same way. And this company maybe they don't promote innovation because also they don't want to manage the risks. Mm-hmm. And there are also, if you think about procurement, using different way of procurement, more collaborative and so on. There is not the law that can support this, and insurance company then don't support you and don't to give you the money to support this project because there are no experience. So how to manage the risks, and it's again related to money.
Okay, funny. And Ollie, last word.
I'd kind of echo everything that's just been said, really, so I don't know if I have much to add on the topic. But I'd say actually there is definitely encouraging trends within the industry that I hope continue. From the public funded sector, we've seen Crossrail and the Innovate platform that's really kicked off, through to HS2, I'm sure that'll continue, and Tideway. I mean, they're all making use of these, and I've been in 2 businesses where actually you're given a shot as a young business, and I think that's really admirable, and we should continue to invest. Hopefully continue to see people put their money where their mouth is, but also I've seen lots of people with innovation manager in the title, and it's sort of make sure these people are heard as well. They're often there finding these right technologies, but struggling to really get the awareness of those within their businesses. So these people already exist within big contractors, and they just need to be given a chance to actually get their ideas heard.
Great. Okay, so I guess it's incumbent on us in the room to make sure that we're pushing this in the industry, going back to our bosses, and if you are the boss, making sure you're providing some funding to these great talkers tonight. So I'd like to give a quick round of applause to our speakers, and thank you.